Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. Today's show, like the story behind today's show, is definitely interesting. I mean, reading this guy's bio, it was pretty interesting, and like how this company got formatted and how they got started, and not every day you have someone that's sitting in front of you that actually survived going to court. First of all, second of all, going to court being sued for trademark stuff. So when you kind of come out on top, especially when you're dealing with like a large corporation versus a little guy, it's definitely a breath of fresh air to have this individual on our show today. So I'm going to deem him, I was going to originally deem him the horologist boss, and I was like figuring that, some people may know what that is, some people may not know what that is. So I would like to make it a little bit easier to comprehend. We're going to call him the timeless boss. RT, the floor is yours. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what we're talking about today?
Well, thanks for the intro essay. I was actually timeless, and I realized that when we started, I wasn't wearing a watch, so I just put one on.
Yes.
I love dad jokes. First and foremost, I'm a dad, father of two little guys, and yeah, lucky enough to have a couple of awesome companies that I get to run. A great team supporting me, and my foundational story was my friend Tyler and I started Vortic Watch company in college when we were at Penn State. In 2011, we had the idea, launched on Kickstarter in 2014, was sued by the world's largest watch company, the Swatch Group, about 6 months in, survived. Long story short, 6-year legal battle. And here we are today. Long story short, we salvage and restore antique American pocket watches and turn them into one-of-a-kind wristwatches.
Nice, nice. And I mean, just hearing that, I mean, obviously, like the fact that I want to know which one of you guys were you guys just walking down the street one day and you picked up like a watch, or was it like a old grandfather's watch? Like, how the hell did you even come up with the concept to convert a pocket watch into a wristwatch?
Great question. So it's a bit of a longer story, but to make it as short as I can, we had a bunch of ideas on the golf course one day after class in college, and we took all these ideas to our, like the faculty, our professors. Asked a bunch of questions. We're working on some crazy idea that dealt with watches more in like the wristband side. We're engineers, we're not watchmakers, and so we were just trying to figure out like, okay, what kind of products can we make, all this stuff. And at a certain point, we were like, okay, if we're going to build a watch brand and we're going to make a watch company, could we make it in America? This was like 2013 when the idea was like really coming about. Made in America is really popular right now, but it was super popular and like top of mind for everyone back then. And so we were like, all right, can we make it in USA, right? Most watches are made in China or Switzerland at this point. So is that even possible? Went down that road and stumbled upon the history of what we call the great American watch companies. And if you didn't know, about 100 years ago, we were the Switzerland of the world. The Northeast of America was covered in watch manufacturing companies, and they made pocket watches back then. So between 1850 and 1950 or so, over 100 million pocket watches were manufactured in the US. And today, so fast forward to like the crash of 2008, most pocket watches are gold and silver. The case is gold or silver. And so pocket watches don't have much use anymore. They get scrapped by pawn shops and estate buyers for the precious metal that's around them, leaving the inside, what we call the piece of American history, all the guts that tell time, like the gears and springs and the face of it. The inside is trash. And so we created this business called Vortic Watch Company to take trash to treasure and preserve American history one watch at a time. And that's why we say, we turn an antique American pocket watch into a wristwatch, because we take this and we make it into this, and we build the case and the crown and the hardware around that old pocket watch internals to save it and give it a second shot at life.
Nice. So it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think I was watching a video and you were deeming the pocket watches to be orphan watches. So like you're finding their new life, you're finding their new parents, and you're collaborating and you're rebuilding them and you're giving them new life, like you said. So that's definitely awesome. I mean, you're repurposing American history. So with that, I mean, let's talk about a thing you said back in 2012. So 2014 is when you kind of did the Kickstarter. So how
Mhm.
did that come to fruition?
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically, I mean, we couldn't figure out how to get funding initially. We didn't know where to start, And so Kickstarter was also really popular back then. People still use it today, but like in 2014, it was super hot. Everyone was just learning about it. People were excited. People were putting money into it all over the world. And so we said, all right, well, let's put our minimum viable product on Kickstarter and see what people think. And if it works, we'll make this watch, you know? And so we 3D printed an example of what we do, printed it on at our house, you know, just the case and everything like that. We found the old pocket watch internals, and we showed our Kickstarter followers and just, you know, basically anyone that cared what the minimum viable product was. And we said, hey, our journey is to try to take an old pocket watch and turn it into a wristwatch. Let us know if you like it. We set our goal at $10,000 because at that time we were right out of college. We thought 10 grand was a lot of money. And we ended up making about 41,000 in our first 30 days on Kickstarter. And we used that as minimum viable product market fit, got a lot of feedback from would-be customers to say, hey, this is really cool, but like if you change this, and this, I would totally buy it. PS, if you did that, I would probably pay 2 or 3 times as much for it. Like, I feel like you're not charging enough. And we heard that and still hear that today, thankfully. And just got a ton of feedback from Kickstarter that we use to go build our business plan and our pitch deck and go raise hundreds of thousands of dollars that it ended up taking to actually start the company and make the product, which was then really our 2015 journey of figuring out how to make it in order to ship those first few products.
Nice, nice. So I think you're definitely living up to your subtitling, right, about being not assembled but being American built, right? So I mean, you kind of go in the grassroots way, and it's kind of like you tested the market and then you're relaunching it again, right? So like this, let's dive into like you a little bit, right? So I think your partner's name is Tyler. So there's Tyler and then there's RT. So if you can kind of define yourself in 3 to 5 words, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
Gosh, that's a great question. Um, I am a an entrepreneur, storyteller, and what's in my head is get it doneer. we like
Nice.
to say we'll figure it out. That was Tyler's and my like story, and we just joked about it the other day. We're building a new building downtown, and we're in our conference room, we're thinking about just putting like we'll figure it out big neon sign at the top, because that's been our whole motto for this whole time. um, but yeah, I would say I am first and foremost an entrepreneur. I'm a, I would say, lifestyle entrepreneur in the terms of like multi-passionate is probably a good way to say. I have multiple companies. I think I'm up to 6 or 8 LLCs at this point for myself, and I just keep having crazy ideas all the time, and I keep saying yes to myself and just doing it. And I keep finding great people to help me figure out how to do it.
Wow.
And that it goes back to that like we'll figure it out kind of concept that Tyler and I set out on is when we have a good idea, like taking a pocket watch and turning it into a wristwatch, a lot of stuff has to happen between the idea and the concept. But we figured it out, and we totally can. And then add to that the marketing side. I also have a marketing agency called Carter and Custer, and we're storytellers. That's really my passion. When you go nature versus nurture, I think by nature I'm an entrepreneur. I was born that way. I can't get out of it. But nurture, my parents, both of my parents were ad men and ad women, right? My mom and dad both worked for huge advertising agencies their whole careers. And so I grew up watching the Super Bowl for the advertisements, not for the game. And so I just love advertising. I love marketing. I love story-based advertising. Basically, I love selling without selling. You tell a story, and by the time you finish the story, the customer wants to buy whatever you put in front of them. And you didn't
Very
even
cool.
tell them how much it costs. So that's me.
Very true. Very true. So, I mean, going off of that storytelling thing, I mean, I want you to kind of talk about the story about the railroad grade pocket watches and the safety mechanism. Like, I think you told a really good story about how that came to be and how you guys had to overcome like that safety mechanism, and then you created a whole new product by figuring out how to solve that problem.
Yeah. Awesome question. And I don't talk about this much except when we're talking about that product, which we call the Railroad Edition. So most pocket watches are set with the crown. It's called pendant set. So the crown at the top of the watch, you just pull the crown out. It has a little click, and then you pop it back in. And when you pull it out, you can change the time. And when you pop it back in, it's locked in and it's just taken away. On the railroad pocket watches, the crown doesn't articulate. You can't move the crown. You actually have to take the entire front glass off of the pocket watch. And then there's a little lever, typically up near like 1 or 2 o'clock on the face of the watch. And once you get the whole front of the watch off, you can pull that lever. And when the lever's out, and only when that lever is out, can you change the time.
Wow.
And that was because, if you think about a pocket watch and the crown being up here at the top, if I am a conductor or an engineer in the year 1901, when there is literally no other way to tell what time it is than this thing that I'm holding right now as my pocket watch, and I put it in my pocket after I'm done using it, I have to make sure I don't accidentally pull the crown to change the time. Otherwise, I'm SOL. And so that was, like you said, it's a safety mechanism so that the conductor, the engineer, never changed the time. And that became this massive undertaking that took Tyler, who does all of our R&D, 3.5 years of testing and trying and developments. We probably had 12 or 13 different iterations of prototypes to figure out, how do we let the consumer of our product, turning that pocket watch into a wristwatch, still access the lever without any issues. Like, it still needs to be water resistant. It still needs to be shock resistant, dust proof. And so that became this whole ordeal. And we invented several different ways to solve that problem that we call the Railroad Edition. And it basically just gives the end user now today easier access to that lever. And we even made a modern version of that lever to just make the little lip on it a little easier to grab, so that you can change the time. And what that does is it ends up with this awesome railroad pocket watch turned into a wristwatch. And the railroad history of America is why a lot of people buy the watches that we make.
Yeah, it's very cool. It goes back to what you're saying. You're a storyteller, so you're telling the story. So I want the listener that you can actually picture like this old time watch being completely dismantled and reassembled into something that's brilliant and also is more contemporary as well. So with that, obviously that was one of the hurdles that you guys had to overcome. Let's talk about like the elephant in the room as far as like that trademark issue that you guys had with the Swatch company. So like, how did that like happen? Did you guys get like a cease and desist letter? Did you get like a phone call? Obviously, it's something that you don't want to happen as an entrepreneur, but obviously in your journey, not only did it happen, but you guys kicked it in its ass and conquered it. So let's talk about that.
Thank you. So we launched on Kickstarter in November of 2014, and we got a cease and desist by the world's largest watch conglomerate called the Swatch Group in, I think, July of 2015. Which was about 6 months before we had even shipped a single watch. So a lot of lawsuits like patent and trademark, they come from like, you launch a product, you ship thousands or tens of thousands of units all around the world. And then you realize like, we stepped on somebody's toes. Somebody realized it. Somebody bought our product and they own something to do with it already. We messed up. Didn't happen to us. We hardly existed. We put an advertisement in the May-June issue of Watch Time magazine, which is the largest US-based wristwatch industry magazine. And it was our coming out to the world as like, we have a watch company and we are not watchmakers. We're engineers. We're turning pocket watches into wristwatches. And we just launched on Kickstarter. Here's a Photoshop rendering of what our products look like. Here's what we do. Contact a watchmaker at Vortic today was at the bottom. Someone in the Swatch Group, which had tens of thousands of employees, someone saw that ad and saw that it said Hamilton on the face of the watch, and that's the issue. So we created this rendering of what our products look like. There's 10 great American watch companies that made these pocket watches 100 years ago. Elgin, Waltham, Illinois, Ball. There's just really cool old, American watch company names. One of them is Hamilton. The Hamilton Watch Company was started in the mid 1800s and lasted until the late 1800s and lasted until the mid 1900s. And they were in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and they made some of the highest quality pocket watches. And they said Hamilton right on the face of the watch. We're taking a pocket watch, turning it into a wristwatch. We're keeping it all original. Like I said, our mission is to preserve American history. So we're not changing what it says on the face of the watch. But the Swatch Group today owns the trademark on the name Hamilton, because when Hamilton went out of business in like the late 60s, the company that owned Swatch Group purchased all the assets, including the trademark. We didn't know that. We had no idea what any of that meant at that time. And we learned after we got the cease and desist that this was what most people in the legal side of things call an interesting case. And I had a federal judge tell me one time, you do not want to be the defendant in an interesting case, because what that means is there's not enough law built around the subject of, in our case, upcycling, turning a pocket watch into a wristwatch. Nobody's been sued over anything like that before. And that means if there's not enough legal decisions made in the industry that you're in, we got to see it through all the way so we can have the knowledge into the legal system so that future decisions can get made in a better way. And while that's fascinating, again, you don't want to be me and Tyler in that situation, because it took about 6 years for us to prove our innocence and basically just prove that we were never doing anything wrong. We were just taking a pocket watch and turning a wristwatch. In no way were we counterfeiting, which is what they accused us of, which means that they were saying that we were putting the name Hamilton on the watch. You and I know as we're talking, we're not doing that. It's all original. It's 100 years old. It just happens to say Hamilton already. They also accused us of trademark infringement, which is basically using someone else's name to go make money. That wasn't our purpose at all. We were preserving American history. Yes, it had someone else's name on it. Yes, it was their trademark, but it's kind of irrelevant. It's our entire business model. Yeah, like I said, it unfortunately took us about 6 years of back and forth and different legal battles to prove everything I just said.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just listening to it. I mean, it's hopefully entrepreneurs don't have to go through this, but again, it's a real thing that definitely happens, and you guys kind of tackled it. And it's again, like, the key word you use was upcycling. Upcycling is one of these things that potentially has been around forever, but now it has a name. It's been branded. So like now they're gonna have to kind of figure out the legalities of that. So like this time travel back, right? I mean, like, you know a lot about watches. Like I'm listening to you and you sound like a historian, right? Like, I mean, you're telling us facts, you're telling us dates, you're telling us names. Like, what kind of kid were you? Were you the kid that was memorizing the almanac, or were you a kid that was out there on a soccer team? Like, which one were you, man?
Neither. I was a farm boy. I am the fourth generation of DeLong Christmas Tree Farm. So my great grandfather started a Christmas tree farm in Reading, outside of Reading, Pennsylvania, in 1941. I am an only child, and so I inherited that farm. And my childhood was basically preparing me to take over the farm someday, and trying to make me the best potential entrepreneur slash small business owner that my family could make me. And that Christmas tree farm was our family's side hustle for decades. I mean, most of its life, mostly because Christmas tree farms, especially only about 40 acres, which is what we had, they just can't make enough money for a whole family to live off of. Especially in the early 2000s, when everyone and their mother was selling Christmas trees, Walmart, Home Depot, and you could get a Christmas tree for $25. Now you can buy them at Whole Foods. So that industry was starting to die away, at least the small business side of it, during my childhood, which was, I mean, a formative experience, right? I mean, my parents my parents and grandparents were kind of grooming me to take over the farm. I loved Legos, to try to answer your question in that way. Like I've always been like a little nerdy in terms of like I just want to understand how things work. I really like learning how things are made. And so Legos were always my thing. Like I said, my parents were in advertising, and so they always bought things based on the packaging and the story behind it, and they told me that as they purchased it, which was really cool. And then my parents thought I would want to be an architect when I was in like middle school, because I was building stuff with Legos, and I would build the thing that it said on the box, and then I would rip it apart and I would build something random. And so from architecture, I went into engineering, and I studied industrial engineering at Penn State and got more into supply chain, and I ended up working for Walmart and logistics right out of school.
Wow.
But that was my journey to become an engineer, and it was all rooted in like, how could my parents and grandparents prepare me to be the heir of our family Christmas tree farm.
Hmm. Wow. I'm just listening to you speak, and usually when I have like partnerships like this, I usually find like the opposite common denominator. Like one person is highly creative and the other person is highly analytical, but it kind of seems like you and Tyler are on the same wavelength. I mean, I think Tyler's more in like the machining side of things, but obviously you're a big engineer as well too, and maybe you're more on the creative side. So let's talk about like that partnership. I mean, partnerships are not easy. They're like marriages. So how has that worked? Have you guys bumped heads, or are you guys more so on the same wavelength majority of the time?
Yeah, awesome question. Thank you. Um, it is a partnership. A business partnership is exactly like a marriage. And now that I'm part of multiple partnerships, I can share that in absolute transparency. It's exactly the same. And the underlying thing that makes partnerships fail is lack of communication. And so Tyler and I, over a decade of knowing each other now, have just now figured out how to properly communicate with each other. And hopefully that answers your question, because the true answer is it's a freaking roller coaster, and it was and has been and still is. And thankfully we're on an upslope right now, and it's easy, and everything is going really well, but it definitely wasn't always like that. Tyler studied math in college. He did not finish college. And you know, he went through a phase where he was, I guess, like, thought that maybe that spoke negatively towards him in some way. But he poured himself into learning CNC machining, or taking a chunk of metal and turning it into whatever crazy idea he and I had. And he taught himself how to use the CNC machines that we have now on YouTube. And currently he runs, I mean, it's going to be like $1.5 million of equipment this year that's completely under his purview, that he taught himself how to use on YouTube without any, like, he didn't need to go to college. And he's making more now than anyone with a math degree, apologies, would make out of school. And that came from a lot of conversation between me and him of like, yeah, okay, I studied engineering, so maybe I should be on the R&D and building the products. But he was just a lot more passionate about that stuff, and he loved that stuff. I was a lot more passionate about marketing and sales and building the website and talking to customers and going to trade shows and all that kind of stuff. And he wasn't. He didn't want to talk to the customer as much as I did. And so our partnership kind of started on that conversation of like, all right, you do this, I do this. Similar thing with the lawsuit, where we got hit with this massive lawsuit. And I don't remember the conversation, and it might not have happened, but at some point we decided, hey, I'm going to focus on the lawsuit, and I'm going to protect us from this massive corporate bully that's coming after us. And you, Tyler, are going to like stay home and fight the home front battle and build the watches so that we can keep selling watches, so that we can afford to defend ourselves legally. And so we, as a true partnership, we were almost ships in the night, as they say, for a long time, just kind of doing our own thing because we had to divide and conquer and had to figure that out. And then that created this other side of the roller coaster, because once we bridged that gap and we got closer to finishing the lawsuit, we got better at making the products, then we started butting heads again of like, okay, what are we doing next? How are we going to grow the company? What's the next step? And we had to have a lot of hard conversations about what those next steps are. And those conversations led to a lot of growth, personal and professional. And I can say right now, like, we're in the best spot we've ever been as a partnership, as a company, and just as humans individually.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, like when you're talking about marketing, I can see like you're glowing, you're lighting up, and when I think about Tyler, I see him hugging a machine, completely happy when a new machine comes in, and like just, and I haven't spoken to him, but I just get that vibe from both of you guys. Like that,
You're right.
that's the way that it runs. So let's talk about like the perception of overnight success, because like now your company is growing, it's prosperous, you guys are in a scaling mode, you're heading towards the moon, and now your name's probably popping up left and right everywhere. So the perception of a regular person is like, who they just pop out of nowhere. But in reality, how long have you guys been on this path to where you are right now?
Yeah. What do they say? Gradually, and then all of a sudden, it's that's really what it feels like. Is we I think we started to put our name on the map when the big news, and that we got a bunch of press about the lawsuit. We were on national television for over 6 minutes, twice now, about that lawsuit. We've been in, I was the centerfold of Entrepreneur Magazine, about a year ago. Like that, you're right. Someone's perception. A lot of people heard about us in the last year and a half or so because of either this lawsuit or how we handled it, or me doing podcast tours like this, right? Just like a more focused, like, hey, let's go tell people we exist now. But I mean, we started the journey on Kickstarter in 2014. That's 8 years ago. It feels like it was yesterday, and it also feels like it was decades ago at the same time. And so, yeah, it's definitely not necessarily, and in no way is like an overnight success. But I would call it, it took us probably 5 years of doing what we do in turning pocket watches into wristwatches, just to figure out how to best solve that problem and best build a business around just that. And then that kind of let me go in terms of like, okay, we got it figured out. We can scale this a little bit more. So now I can go talk about it more. Now I can go market it more. Now I can put more money into advertising. And then obviously with PR and the lawsuit, we had a kind of a nice inflection point with a bunch of great stories coming out about us. And now things like marketing just kind of come easy because we have so many of these foundational stories that we can go back to. And we have so much credibility built with our customers. And we have probably we're probably approaching 2,000 watches out in the world now. And so we have 2,000 cheerleaders, out there talking about us all the time. And that takes a while. It's an exponential curve to get there.
Wow, wow. So I mean, from what I'm getting, it's kind of like there's pros and cons to getting a lawsuit, but being that it was essentially Big Brother, you kind of want to give them a high five and say thanks for the support, because that's what they ended up doing, right? They ended up supporting your whole marketing budget without having to have a marketing budget. You just had to more so focus on the legal aspects, but again, that 15 minutes of fame could be utilized for your company story forever.
You're 100% right. And that's the way, I like when other entrepreneurs talk about removing negativity from your life. You have to forcefully do it. And stories like that, about a massive lawsuit that cost us 6 figures that all but ruined my life and took our business away from us. I could think back and think like, oh my gosh, that was such a huge waste of money, such a massive waste of time. I had some of the hardest conversations because of that. I could think, why me? Why me? Why did this happen to me? All that stuff. Or I could think about it like you just said, and I invested about $100,000 into a legal battle that has made us 7 figures worth of marketing and PR. Just being on national television for 6 minutes would have cost 300 or 400 grand. So I try to spin it and make it a positive thing and talk about it in a positive way for multiple reasons. One being what I just said, and two, it's easier to stay positive in my head and look forward rather than backwards.
So I mean, with that, right? I mean, we're talking about like the pros and cons, and I've deemed you the timeless boss. So let's say you could turn over your wrist, you could dial into a particular time within the last 10, 20 years, and you can go back to that time frame for maybe 5 minutes and talk to yourself. First of all, when would you go back to, and what would you say to yourself to make you be where you are to make it happen a lot faster?
Um, Gosh, I would I would try to dial into like the 2016 range where I was first raising money. We were raising, I think in 2016, 2017, I raised five or $600,000 in equity round of financing for the company. And we were at that time, we were trying to figure out how to scale what we do right now in a massive way and say, like, all right, we take pocket watches into wristwatches. It's really, really hard to do what we do,
Mhm.
but we have some plans. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to get to 3,000 or 4,000 watches a year. And we're going to sell them for $1,500 to $2,000 a piece, and we're going to make millions of dollars, and it's going to be awesome. And that was the plan. And we had all these other, side products and all these other things we were doing. I wish I could dial back into that time and sit myself and Tyler down and say, guys, that's cute that you want to scale this business, but this is an unscalable business. Just make a few hundred watches a year, charge 4 times what you're charging right now, and then build another business that's a lot more scalable right alongside, like a sister company or something. And fast forward to today, that's what we're doing today. Because we realized after almost 8 years of trying to figure this out, that it's really hard to take a pocket watch from 100 years ago and turn it into a wristwatch. And so we're just going to own that, be the best in the world at it, make 400 watches a year, charge 5,000 or so dollars a piece for them. And that's it. And it's just a buy it or don't customer. Like there's 400. So you're lucky to get one. And that's the like vibe that we're trying to give off now as a company. And I'll tell you what, it's working better than anything else we've ever done, for a number of reasons. But just because we kind of swallowed our pride and said, you know what, this is very hard to scale. So let's just not scale it. Let's just be the best at it.
Mhm.
Let's make one watch a day. And that's what we do. We come out with one new one of a kind watch every single day.
Wow.
And when it's sold, it's gone. It posts on our website at 12 noon Mountain Time. And typically they sell in minutes. And that's such a beautiful business model, and no one else can do it. And no one else even does the pocket watch to wristwatch thing, period. So that's really cool. And then Tyler and I are building another company that we're going to announce later this year. We have a whole YouTube show that we're like documenting. We call it Custer and Wolf Building a Watch Company. And we're documenting every single piece of growing a new company that's much more scalable, that we can sell thousands of units. If you're familiar with Shinola, they're America's largest watch company currently, but not for long. We're going to take them on, right? Like that's the plan. And we couldn't do that with our original business model. And so I wish I had been on the journey I am today 5 years ago. That's what I was saying.
Nice. I think like that was a solid segue because I mean you talked about being in supply chain and working for like one of the big manufacturers per se, right? I was wondering like okay, supply and demand. Like eventually these watches potentially could run out because they're not creating any more. So you kind of answered that question. I mean that and again I want to kind of figure out like if you did not go down the road to say branch out and make a more of a manufacturing play, how were you going to be sustainable with the limited amount of pocket watches in the world?
Yep. Yeah. And that's, I think I answered most of that, but I would add just that, um, since there was 100 million pocket watches made 100 years ago, even if 1% of them still exist, which
Yep.
is low, like it's much more than that. But even if 1% of them still exist, that means we have 1 million pocket watches to work from. And if we only make 300 to 400 watches a year, we'll at least have plenty for my lifetime. And that's about as far ahead as I can possibly think. Hopefully my sons or Tyler's kids want to take over Vortic Watch Company someday. But you can't plan for that. So we're just looking 5 to 10 years into the future. And we have enough pocket watches that we can make the best of them into wristwatches. for the foreseeable future. And we're just going to keep doing that. And, just that's Vortic Watch Company as it stands right now. We're not going to touch it. I keep saying to the whole team, and Tyler does too, don't turn any knobs, don't switch any levers. If you don't know what it does, don't touch it. Everything's working. And we got to keep this thing going. We built a machine and it's awesome. And then we're going to build a whole second company alongside of it that we call a sister company, basically building our own little parent company like Swatch Group. Shout out to them. Thanks for the inspiration. And we're going to have our own, conglomerate, as it were, but starting small and building a separate company in order to achieve that growth.
Nice, nice. So I think a couple things you brought up. You brought up legacy a couple different times. Coming from the farm being, given to you, and then now you're talking about potentially your kids and Tyler's kids picking up this new farm of watches moving forward. So, like, how do you guys currently? I think your parents are also in advertising as well, right? So they were like you said, mad men, mad women. That's a different state of mind versus where you are right now. So I want to talk about like your family life and your current work life. Like, what's that work life balance looking like for you currently?
Yeah. So one of my friends, his name's Kyle Depius. He wrote a book called Guys Trip. He does these really cool trips for guys that you might imagine that's what he does. And he talks about that a lot in terms of work-life balance, but he calls it work-life integration. And I like that way of looking at it because to be transparent, I have zero balance. There's no balance going on over here. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So my partner, her name's Lindsay. We have two little boys, Sawyer and Wesley. And she is also an entrepreneur, and she understands me. She understands that it's hard to turn my brain off and stop thinking about work. And just like we've talked about with Tyler and that partnership, she and I have had our own little roller coaster going, and we've been through hell and back, trying to figure this out and figure out how to work with each other on a day-to-day basis. And the biggest thing that's worked for me in that partnership and the partnership at home and trying to be a good dad, even though I want to work all the time, is just focus on everything I just said, right? Like if you keep the idea of balance, and like I said, I would say integration in your mind all the time, and you keep thinking about it and keep it top of mind, you'll never forget it. So I just posted a reel on Instagram last night. And I don't know if it'll show you here, but my son Sawyer is right on the front of my lock screen on my phone, right? Like doing things like that to help you remember why you're doing all this stuff. Like, yeah, we can make a ton of money as entrepreneurs. That's great. We can surround ourselves with awesome humans helping us build these things. But what happens when you die? What if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? Like, my sons can take this company and run it. Like Tyler and I are building awesome systems, and Lindsay and I are building awesome like family systems. We have a trust. We have all kinds of LLCs going on. We have living wills. What happens if one of the planes I'm on all the time goes down? Like we think about that stuff, and it's hard to think about that stuff. It's hard to have those conversations. But if you keep it top of mind of like, why am I doing all this stuff? You'll be reminded to have those conversations. And then you can set up consistent ways to force yourself to have those conversations. One being Lindsay and I do a date night every Friday night, no matter what. We get a babysitter, they watch the kids, and we go to dinner and we talk about all the things we should have talked about the whole week. Sometimes we talk about nothing. Sometimes we talk about the show we're binging on Netflix. And sometimes we have a hard conversation about money, and everything in between. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what we do, and it works for us, and it hasn't always worked for us. It's a moving target. But so far so good.
Nice, nice. So definitely interesting. I mean, it's like you have a plan. Like I mean, that's what it really comes down to. You have a plan, and then you're creating these processes and procedures to support that plan, no matter what happens and whatever forks come up in the road. So that leads me to like another question. Like I mean, going back to you being like a farm raised kid, right? I mean, that means you're probably waking up 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. So like, what is your morning routines post farm life?
So right now, and for the last few years, having little kids, the morning starts with absolute chaos. And it's in the best way. One of the boys comes running into the room and says, "Okay, mommy, daddy, I'm ready for breakfast." And Sawyer did that this morning. He's like, "Mom, I got to poop. And also, I'd like eggs and toast for breakfast." And Lindsay's like, oh, yes, sir. I guess I'll get out of bed. And then our youngest, Wesley, is just already screaming in his crib saying, "Daddy, daddy, come," he wants the same thing. Right. So I just want to acknowledge that I wish in some ways I could wake up, I could journal, I could sip a cup of coffee on the patio, watch the sunrise. But the parents out there, that's not real. So you wake up with that. And then, like you said, you have a plan. So I always have a plan to do at least some sort of structure. And so once we figure out that initial chaos, I start the plan, which always starts with the gym. So I go to the gym at least 6 days a week, even if it's just 5 minutes on a treadmill, just to get my mind right for the day. Sometimes it's an hour with a personal trainer and I'm lifting heavy and I'm trying to gain weight right now, and just focused on that fitness journey. But some days I just go so that I said I did it, and I start my day off on a positive note of like, okay, I accomplished something today. I walked 5 minutes on the treadmill. Check. Thank you. And then, after that, honestly, I rely on my calendar. I have an amazing chief of staff who runs my life, runs my calendar. Her name's Bella. And she basically gives me my structure and my plan for the day. And we talk about it and we say like, okay, ideally no meetings before 10 a.m. so I can like do some focus work and stuff like that. And then I have a podcast interview like this, or, a few different meetings. Today I ran a staff meeting, like an all team meeting for our ad agency. And then, working on some projects for the rest of the day after this, with Bella, just trying to get organized and catch up and deal with the 100 emails that I have. And to answer your question, though, it's all that morning routine starts with the fitness journey, making sure my mind's right, trying to eat right, trying to drink enough water, trying to get the right amount of caffeine. That's a moving target too. And then I look at my calendar and I do what my calendar says, which has been a huge pro tip for me. Like every Sunday, I look at the calendar, I make sure it's right. I make sure I don't have any weird gaps. I make sure I can actually have enough time between my meetings to like recap and focus and prep for the next one. And then I optimize it accordingly. And that way, every morning when I wake up and I look at the calendar, I can just do what I'm told and show up to the meetings. It's a lot less stress that way for me.
Wow, wow. I mean, just listening to you. I mean, it's you're eating and you're sleeping and you're breathing entrepreneurism through and through. So I mean, I love hearing that. First of all, right? So I think one of the key things that you said was essentially like being focused and optimizing, and I think all of these different keywords that you're utilizing in this conversation. I would think that you're really studious as well too. So are you reading any books, or have you read any books in your early part of your career that kind of helped you to get to where you are currently?
Yeah, great question. I have read a few books. I am not, I would not say that I'm well read by any means. It's been a challenge put back on me by some of my peers and some of my advisors and people I look up to, is like, hey, I just have so many things that I'm doing that I make excuses for myself as to why I don't have time to read. But I live now about 20 minutes from our office building that's under construction right now. And when that stops, my plan, or when we can move in, my plan is I'll have 40 minutes in the car every at least 4 days a week. And so I plan to listen to more podcasts, listen to audiobooks, things like that. When I am in the car, I am listening to audiobooks, and the most recent one that I'm in is Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins. I'm about halfway through it. Super long book, but really worth it. It's all about investing your money wisely. And that's kind of another journey I'm on right now is, okay, we're making money. What do I do with this money? So that's the current journey. And that's why I'm reading that book. In the past, though, the other question is a really good one is, the formative books, Tyler and I read Building a Story Brand by Don Miller and Start With Why by Simon Sinek at the same time, during the time that we were raising money for Vortic. And we used those two books to rebuild all of our marketing, all of our storytelling. Our homepage of our website is still the same as after we read those books. If you go to vorticwatches.com and you scroll down, you'll literally see the words, what we do, why we do it, and how to buy it. And then there's a little description under it, answering that question, and a button so that you can go buy it. And that's all right at the top. Don Miller, I think, says above the fold. And so we read those two books, and Start With Why is huge, for storytelling and just like people understanding not just what you do and how you do it, but why you do it. And then Building a Story Brand. I mean, I listen to his podcast and I'm just like a super fan of Don Miller. Like, I think he even says it, like, he's not saying anything that nobody already kind of like knows. He's just putting it into a way that we can actually use that and build a story brand out of the companies and the brands that we have.
Nice, nice. So one little quick tip about like the audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks. I'm at the point now I listen to about maybe a book or two on average in 24 to 48 hours.
Nice, cool.
The speed of the books, man. If you turn that book to 1.5 or 2.0 speed, you will cut down on that time significantly. And believe it or not, your brain will just adapt to the speed really quickly, and you'll get way more information a lot quicker.
Somebody else told me that, and I tried 1.5 speed with Tony Robbins' book, and Tony Robbins' voice at 1.5 is intense. I'll tell you what. But in general, yes, I'm sure that works. As soon as I think he read the first chapter, and then it switched to another author that was much easier to understand at 1.5. So that's a solid pro tip, because I do that. I've done that on my the last audiobook. But now that I think about it, I was listening to everything on the slow speed before that. And so it's not like I wasted time, but now I'll remember, thanks to you. I appreciate that.
Cool. So I'm going into like this time frame. I mean, we talked about legacy, we talked about the kids, we talked about your morning routines, books that you're reading. So I mean, you're on a scale of projection, and you're about to create a whole sister company. So where do you ideally see this metropolis that you're building and developing 20 years from now?
It's hard for me to think past even 12 months from now. And my journey right now is trying to be as present as I possibly can. And so this question is a good one. It's just really hard for me to answer in the current state. 5 years from now, I hope that we have a little conglomerate going in terms of, we have Vortic Watch Company, we have our new company coming, which will be called Mechanical Products. And we'll probably have other brands that we've either acquired or merged with or partnered with along the way. By the 5-year mark, we really want to build a brand for Vortic that's like the Orange County Choppers of watches, where like everything's filmed, everything, all the behind the scenes stuff is on video. Like people can see just everything that we are manufacturing. Like, I think that's really where manufacturing is going, is transparency and integrity in manufacturing, by literally showing people like, this is how we make it. And these are the humans that are making it. We're clearly not making it overseas and then trying to hide it. We're showing you what we do right here in Colorado. That's like the 5-year plan. 20 years. Well, let's see. I'll be 51. So hopefully I'll be semi-retired at that point. My kids will be out of the house in college or whatever they decide to do at that point. And my vision for like my retirement, and I'm using this because like I'm just like my dad. There's no way my dad's kind of like trying to retire right now, and it's funny because he's just, his company's like, no, you can't go anywhere, come on. It's going to be really hard for me to stop working, and so my vision is to be an angel investor and own, I don't know, 5 or 10% of 20, 30, 50 companies, and just be able to have that as my group of like mentors that like I can do for them that what my mentors are currently doing for me and my investors currently do with me is just like, hey, I put a couple $100,000 into your company. You can send me a monthly update if you want, but just, here's my Calendly link or whatever happens 20 years from now. Who knows? It'll probably be some kind of crazy thing that pops up on our Google Glass or whatever, and hit me up, and if you need my value, I'll add it, and I'll help you through a thing that I've probably done or I've probably failed, and I can help you maybe not fail at that same thing. And I think that's really what I see my life morphing into, is that like angel investor advisor kind of person. The only other thing that I've strongly considered, and I'm still considering, but has been interesting to watch recently, is getting into politics. I feel a call to serve my country in some way. And I'm not a military vet, but I employ several, and we sponsor a school for watchmakers called the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative. And so I try to do a lot to support that. My last name's Custer. I'm related to General Custer, so I love military history and all the stuff that went into that. And in politics, I sometimes think it'd be nice to go back to what used to happen in like the 1800s, when there weren't lifelong politicians, and strong entrepreneurs and strong leaders were tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, you should be president. You'd be really good. That I think would be life-changing for some people. And if I feel that call when I'm that age, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. Probably depends on what's happening politically at that time, honestly. But that's it.
As well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, you're talking about veterans, you're talking about entrepreneurs, and you're talking about potentially politics, right? So who is your ideal avatar? I mean, obviously, I would think the politicians could afford to buy your watch. Maybe the veterans may have enough capital. So I mean, like, who are you really creating these watches for, and who's actually buying them?
Yeah, awesome question. I firmly believe, and we don't have any statistics to back this up, but I firmly believe that roughly 60% of Vortic Watch Company's customers are entrepreneurs and small business owners, American entrepreneurs and small business owners. We sell worldwide, but like 95% of our sales are within the continental United States. And I think that has happened because Tyler and I share our story a lot. We've shared our story through lots of entrepreneurial outlets. A lot of the influencers that talk about us and Vortic are entrepreneurs, like Mr. Wonderful for Shark Tank has a Vortic watch. List goes on. A bunch of awesome entrepreneurs have our watches and talk about them. And so I think just organically, by just like removing the curtain and showing everyone what we do, and just like showing up as, American small business owners over here just trying to build a watch and maybe have a white picket fence someday. I think we've earned that to have a bunch of small business owners and entrepreneurs as customers. And they've earned it too, right? Like they are like, I want to work hard enough and grow my business or sell my business or whatever to be able to afford a $3,000 to $5,000 watch. And when they do that, they come to us instead of Rolex, which is really the other brand you think of when you're like, I made it, I'm going to buy a Rolex. So that's most of our customers. And then, yeah, I mean, we have a ton of, especially military veterans, especially high ranking officers that own our military edition, which is this watch. So this pocket watch that's on my wrist, this pocket watch was called the Master Navigator's Watch, and it was flown on all the B bombers in World War II. And we only make 50 of them a year, and they come out on Veterans Day, and 10% roughly of the proceeds go to that school we talked about, the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative. And so we have an amazing following of people who have served or are somehow military affiliated that really want to buy that watch or already own it. And the list goes on. I mean, we do have your traditional watch collectors who, I mean, we have one person that has over 50 of our watches. We have, I mean, I would say 40% of our customers buy a second watch within the first 2 years of owning their first watch from Vortic. And so we have like a really strong following of watch guys, is what I call them, just people that just love watches and love supporting people that make watches. Um, so yeah, it's broad, but I'm proud to say I think the majority of our customers and really our target demographic are entrepreneurs and small business owners in many ways.
Nice. So let's keep spinning on that. So if you're communicating, you're talking to them, right? You're telling the story, and you're talking about military, you're talking about the railroad, you're talking about the bombers, you're talking about like all the history that goes into like your product and your services. But again, you have overcame so many different hurdles, like figuring out how to break past that safety thing, figuring out how to overcome like the lawsuit. And I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm hearing all this. What words of wisdom would you give me to help me to continue on my path and my journey?
Um, so I heard a quote recently, and it's a quote from a poet. And so I will inherently botch it because I am not a poet. Um, but um, it's the poet's name is Adam in Q, and he said, "I'm living by the beach, and I never see the ocean."
Hmm.
And what that means, and I lost my shit when he said that, and I'm getting emotional now just thinking about it because um, I've been advised that I should feel a lot more gratitude for how far I've come and all the work that I've done and we've done. Um, but as discussed, I feel strongly about how I need to keep looking forward, and my goals are massive as compared to where I am right now.
Mhm.
But when you look back and you look at what you've built, and I try to think for a second, look at what I've done, look at all these jobs that exist because of me and of us and me and Tyler having those hard conversations to figure it out so we can employ an amazing team and build the coolest watch on planet Earth. Like, you have to periodically look backwards and think about all the awesome stuff that you did yesterday and last week and last month and last year, so that you can just give yourself that perspective of, just be proud of yourself for a minute. And that's okay. A lot of people tell us we shouldn't feel that, or at least that's what we perceive as entrepreneurs, is we shouldn't look backwards. We should be forward looking all the time, go make money. Right. But like, we are so blessed. I am so lucky that I get to wake up every day and do whatever the hell I want. And I am so grateful for that. And so my current journey on that, after I heard that quote, I was finally inspired to actually use one of the 4 or 5 gratitude journals that I recently purchased. And I started doing a really quick, it's called the 5-minute journal. It's really inexpensive. And just for 5 minutes, you talk about gratitude and where you come from and what you're grateful for. And you just write all that down once a day. And that has created an insane inflection point in my life recently, where I feel better about looking backwards and being proud of myself and being proud of my team and my family. And massive change has come from that and will come from that. So I would highly encourage any entrepreneur listening to this to take a deep breath, think about how awesome it is, whatever you're doing, and just sit with that for a minute and see how that feels. And if it feels good, do it again because it works for me.
Yeah, I mean that's hella like inspirational and motivational at the same time. So I mean, on that note, I mean, how does someone get in contact with you or find the watches? And I mean, where are you on social media right now?
So Vortic Watch Company is vorticwatches.com. V is in Victor, ORTIC watches.com. My email address is the best way to get to me. And that's RT, like Robert Thomas, at vorticwatches.com. And then you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, etc., which is just RT Custer, Custer.
Nice, nice. So I got a couple bonus questions for you before we close out. One of them is about the name of the company. Like it's an unusual name. So I want you to kind of talk about the etymology of the word and like how did you guys come up with that title?
Totally. So I kind of referenced it and then danced around it and moved on, but the original origin story of Vortic is Tyler and I are playing golf. He wears a watch when he plays golf, which I think is insane. I can't have anything on my wrists or my hands while I'm playing. It gets in the way. And so he's wearing a watch. He takes his swing on the first hole and just shanks it way off into the driving range. Just one of the worst shots I've seen him take. He's a great golfer. And so it was very rare that I see him hit a really bad shot. And he takes his watch off and he says something about how his watch is just a little too loose. And it was like, falling off his wrist as he swung. And I was like, well, that's a bullshit excuse. You just hit a really bad shot. The watch had nothing to do with it. But that created this conversation for the whole rest of the golf round of like, how could we solve that problem? I wonder if we could invent a watch that you turned a dial or something on the watch and it tightened the band around your wrist in tiny little increments, making what we called the perfect fit standard. And that is, if you're familiar with BOA technologies, like the ski boots and golf shoes that you just turn a little knob and it tightens the laces of the boots around your foot. We invented that for watches and we still own the patent. And that's where it comes from, is vortex and tick-tock. So you have vortex, like you're turning something. And then obviously for watches, tick-tock, that's Vortic, making the perfect fit standard, which is our first tagline that we pitched to investors way back when we were in college. And we were advised by those first potential investors and the patent attorney we were working with, like, hey, this is a really cool idea, but it's going to cost like $1 million to figure out how to make this. Like, do you even know what you're getting yourself into? And we were like, nope. What should we do instead? And they were like, what if you just came up with like something that's easier to make that you could like build a brand on and then maybe circle back to that idea at some point later? And that's what we did. And we had the pocket watch into wristwatch idea. That's what we launched with. We still called the company Vortic because we really like that name. And to your point, it's different, it stands out in some ways. And now I say Vortex and tick-tock, a beautiful clash of old and new, which is my way of taking that story and making it a lot shorter for everyone in a pitch conversation. And as we talked about, that second product idea ended up being much more difficult to make than we thought and was much more popular. I mean, people love the idea of taking a pocket watch, turning a wristwatch, and we just haven't had time to circle back to that first idea. And you know what? At this point, we might not, because we've learned so much about the watch industry. There's other ways to solve that problem. It was cool in 2011 when we had the idea, but now we got all kinds of other ideas that are a lot more interesting to us right now.
Nice. A hell of an answer. So going into I think I'm gonna switch it up because I usually have like my signature question, but being that you're a descendant of Custer himself, right? This question is like, if it was possible for you to spend 24 hours with your great grandfather, like what would you think that conversation with you and him would be like, considering his legacy and considering the legacy that you're creating today?
So I am a seventh cousin of General Custer. So my like great grandfather was his, I don't know, uncle, brother, something like that, right? But let's pretend I was actually a descendant of him, because I love this question. If I could hang out with General George Armstrong, I would try to spend the entire time talking about leadership. I've read a couple books about him. My dad has one of the largest collections of Custer books and all that stuff, which I will also inherit. Thanks, Dad. We're going to have to build a museum for all these books. It's going to be awesome. And the story is interesting, and the story is controversial, actually. The story of Custer and Custer's last stand and all that stuff. And there's so many theories about what happened and was he actually a good leader and all that kind of stuff. And he was getting challenged left and right, like politically. Like there's some people that believe that if he wouldn't have died in the battlefield at Custer's last stand, he would have went on to be president of the United States. There's a huge, amount of people that believe that. And there's lots of books about it. And then there's also people that called him not very nice names and said he was not a good person. And you feel that in all politics and all generals, right? You have your believers and your non-believers. And what I would want to know is, you know, like how did he become the leader that he is, or was? How did he get to general status? How did he get his soldiers to go to battle for him and with him? And just try to get some nuggets and some pro tips of, like, especially back then, like, there was no social media. There was, like, right now I'm posting a reel a day to try to get more followers and try to get people to know who I am and build my personal brand. Personal branding wasn't a thing in that time. But he did it, like, there's thousands of books published about him, even though people didn't have a whole lot of access to him. So he must have been pretty cool, I think. And so, yeah, I would just try to figure out, like, what's the secret to that leadership, instead of, because I like the conversation of leadership instead of management, right? And to be a good leader, what does that mean to someone like him?
Wow. Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things. I mean, being that you're the timeless boss, I mean, it's one of those things that if time travel does become relevant, then the opportunity, by all means, should come through you, right? So going into closing, I would like to give you opportunity to interview me, ask me a question. You're the host of Boss Uncaged. The microphone is yours. The show is yours. What questions do you have for me?
I was going to ask about your name. You told me, offline, the story of SA. I appreciate that. I'd like you to tell me and us, just about maybe one or two of the favorite things that you have behind you. You have an awesome background, a lot of stuff going on, and I'm sure there's some stories. I like to call things like that conversation pieces.
Mm.
So what conversation pieces are behind you right now?
I'll say to my right, maybe your left, the Guinness record. Being a participant in that was
Cool.
definitely an interesting story behind that, because originally I heard about it and I was like, all right, it's cool, and then I was like, I wasn't even on the speaking circuit at the time, and then fast forward, I became a speaker and had the opportunity to speak at the event and was actually a contributor to getting that Guinness record as well. So
That's awesome. Congratulations.
yeah, I appreciate that. Cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. Any
Yeah.
other
And
questions?
yeah, well, I'm just kind of starting my journey down that path too. I really want to be a speaker. I had my first little taste of it recently. I hosted a mastermind called Fast Foundations, where we
Nice.
taught a bunch of other people like us and entrepreneurs how to, just do the thing, right? Be entrepreneurs. And I got to speak to that group, and it was super fun. So if I want to be a speaker and get on more stages like you have, what do I do?
Well, it's kind of, I would say, your path, right? I mean, for you, your brand is essentially your path. I mean, you're creating watches, you're creating this kick-ass thing. So really and truly, starting off a podcast is like you're doing is really good, and then after that is kind of leading into talking on stages and asking people. Like, the every time you do a podcast, at the end of every single episode, ask them, do they know anyone that's looking for somebody to speak on this topic, to speak on the stage outside of podcasting? And there's
Yes.
a bunch of different meetup groups, and essentially for every target niche, like I'm sure there's a target niche for watches that where people just meet up and talk about watches. People just meet up and talk about lizards. People meet up and talk about speaking as well. So getting into those circles sooner than later would definitely be more effective.
Shout out to the Lizards Anonymous group of San Francisco, if that's a thing.
It probably is. You probably didn't really officially gave them a shout out.
No, that's such great advice. I really appreciate that. It's that now that I've been doing these reels, I keep getting, other reels that people show me. It's like, hey, you should do this. And the one that I was thinking about doing today is like something to the effect of, like, you got to talk about your business for people to know about your business. You got to talk about your business. So it's just that, right? It's like, if you want something, you got to put it out there. You got to manifest it. You got to talk about it. If no one else knows you want it, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you got a hell of a story too. So I mean, like I say, it's not a rags to riches story, but it's kind of like Big Brother tried to kick my ass. I came out on top. I utilized their millions of dollars to market my stuff for the 15 minutes of fame. So I mean, you have a story. You just have to package it in a format that way people are listening to you. And I mean, they are listening to you now. And it's like, oh my God, I want more. I want to, like, how did you guys do it? Why are you guys doing it? And you also overcame that, and you made a Kickstarter, and so it's like all these components of your puzzle becomes your brand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really why I wanted to be on a bunch of podcasts, was really just for the practice. Obviously it's great marketing, and hopefully someone listening to this will go to vorticwatches.com and buy a watch, but at worst, I feel like this is just fantastic practice. And I get to meet awesome humans like you, SA. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, the pleasure was all mine. I mean, I definitely thank you for taking time out your busy schedule today. And I mean, hopefully you got a solid mountain view out in Colorado, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, sir. Talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Great. S.A. Grant, over and out.